lost private. We're in Normandy.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 25 of the We're Not Lost Private podcast. My name is Joe Muccia, and I was looking through the schedule recently just to see what I had on deck coming up soon and realized it have a spot opened up in the schedule. So, and also looking at the calendar of events for World War II, also noticed that we have coming up the 82nd anniversary of the first landing of U.S. troops on UK soil, coming up on the 26th of January. So I thought it would be really cool just to kind of do a hip pocket episode on that particular event. As we all know, um, it took a while for the U.S. to get involved in the war in Europe. Obviously, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, with Hitler's declaration of war against the United States, it gave President Roosevelt and the U.S. government the impetus to uh, reciprocate and join the European uh, portion of World War II. And so what we had seen prior to was the ABC One Conference, the American British Conference number one, which took part across most of 1941 and into November, where the Allies got together basically before the America's entrance into the war and basically stated that it would be a Germany first strategy. And this is obviously in advance of what happened on December 7th. Which is interesting when you think about it. They're already thinking towards Germany as being the far greater threat than Japan. Um, and as that goes and develops over time, you finally get in late January the first arrival of U.S. troops and elements of the 34th Infantry Division land in Belfast on the 26th of January, 1942. They came across the Atlantic on convoy AT-10, and I know that a lot of folks who listen to this podcast have done a lot of reading about World War II, and they've read a lot of accounts of GIs that were on those convoys and how the conditions were fairly terrible and the food was fairly terrible. I mean, it's obvious for folks who are fans of Band and have read Band of Brothers and some of the other works by veterans of Easy Company, the 506, and will note their descriptions of the food. Boiled fish soup and tomatoes and toast and tea and coffee. And obviously coffee being a regular, but their descriptions specifically of the fish stew was pretty galling. And a lot of them lived off of candy bars bought in the ship store. And the other thing that a lot of them commented about was the lack of room for them to do physical training. Not that a lot of these young guys were probably upset about missing out on PT, but the fact is, by the time they got to England, they had to, rededicate themselves to physical training, get themselves back in shape again, because almost 2 weeks coming across, or generally 2 weeks coming across, you lose some body mass. So they've got to get themselves back in shape, and a lot of that had to do with a lot of cross-country marching and a lot of physical training and a lot of obstacle course work and things like that. But for these first GIs, and now I will say the urban legend is that it's a private by the name of Milburn Henneke of Hutchinson, Minnesota, who was reportedly the first U.S. troop to put foot onto UK soil. He came from the 133rd Infantry Regiment, and the majority of the troops that came out of that regiment were from Minnesota. Um, the fact that that convoy is able to make it across um, basically puts a nail in the thought process that it's going to be Germany first, and it also goes to foot stomp the fact that despite the fact that there's German U-boat activity all across the Atlantic and off the U.S. coast, they still managed to bring over U.S. troops. And out of the convoy, only two ships carried U.S. troops to the tune of just over 4,000 of them. So 4,000 spread out amongst those two troop ships. I mean, the conditions must have been deplorable when you think about it. And a lot of the guys talked about being seasick just from the point that they left the United States all the way to the landing, basically green to the gills all the way through. And frankly, I can empathize. I don't do boats real well, especially boats on the open ocean. So I can easily envision what happened to a lot of these guys. But the thing is that they end up landing, and they're already provided a guide on how to deal with the locals. And it's interesting to see that the locals, when they the GIs first walked down the gangplank, were like, I thought they would be taller, was one thing that is consistently shows across a lot of the reporting from that time frame. And it wasn't like the GIs were completely welcome there. The leadership in Ulster um, basically wants the GIs out of Belfast and out of the area. And it kind of falls on deaf ears because even though Ireland is not considered at war with Germany, um, they don't really get much of a vote. And they're basically told to shut up and color. But for the most part, the GIs get there and they're given a pamphlet on how to deal with the locals. And to me, it's called a pocket guide to Great Britain, and they're provided a bunch of pointers on how to deal with the locals. And to me, these are outstanding. And to go over, and there's about 10 of them. I think are the key points made in the pamphlet. And the first and foremost is the British are reserved but not unfriendly. Um, they're trying to explain to GIs who are a little bit more open how the British are a little more buttoned up and they like their peace and quiet. But if you become friends with them, they'll probably be lifelong friends. The second point is that the British are tough. I mean, they've been at war for several years now, before the Americans have even joined the conflict, and they've been dealing with being bombed, and they've been dealing with losing lots of troops overseas in different areas. So that it's just a reminder that the Brits have been dealing with this for so long, and we're relative newcomers to this conflict. Third point was that the British like their sports, specifically, they like their cricket and they like their soccer and they like their darts. And to be respectful of that, it's not baseball, and it doesn't have, it's not, they are dissimilar to what the GIs would normally be used to seeing, baseball and football, and to be respectful of that while their sports aren't like ours, they love their sports just as much as we love ours. The fourth is that Brits like straightforwardness, but they don't like it when it's overbearing. They like it when it's friendly. Be straightforward, be frank, but don't be overbearing. They like their indoor amusements. Specifically, they like going to the pub, and they like playing checkers, chess. They like playing darts. So be respectful of that. Another point is don't make fun of the British speech or their accents. Remember, we're the newcomers here. We are the guests, and actually, they look at us as having the accent, not the other way around. So just be respectful of that. Don't eat too much. The British have been on rations. Their food's been rationed, and Americans liked big meals, and so just be respectful of that and understand that they've been have their food rationed for years. And I think that is shown in a lot of the wartime writing when GIs would talk about being guests over at British households, and they would go to the PX and buy extra coffee or buy bacon or buy something that their host might be short of, and to make a gift out of it. But basically, it was telling them to be careful and be mindful of the fact that they've been had food rationed, and don't overindulge, because they're going to be very they're going to offer the food, but you don't have to take it. You don't have to take extensive amounts of it. Um, Remember that there's a war on, and again, the British have been dealing with it for quite some time, and understand that we're relative newcomers to this. And not only that, that the British women have been at war. This is well before Rosie the Riveter movement in the United States, and the British women have been working in the industry and at home gardening and serving in the British military, and to be mindful of that. And lastly, the British have come through all of this, including the Battle of Britain, and they're still standing. And we need to be respectful of the fact that that how much they have dealt with over the years. And again, we're newcomers, but we're there to help. And I think it takes time for the GIs to accept all of this. One of the things that was foot stomped in that pamphlet is every American soldier is an unofficial ambassador of goodwill, and they wanted that to to be in the back of every GI's mind, because at the end of the day, the British we've always had a special relationship with them, and it continues to this day. And while a lot of GIs tended to bring their American sensibilities with them, and their American forwardness with them, especially when it came to the opposite sex, I think most GIs were respectful of their hosts. And I think that that is exemplified in a lot of the stories that I've been reading about, especially um, in with the Masters of the Air in mind, and reading Donald Miller's excellent work on it, and a lot of other GIs' writings about it, how they would host holiday parties, especially around Christmas, where they would give gifts to the local children in town. And I think it, especially the children, the GIs took a great liking to the British people, and again, that relationship is endured all the way to today. Um, there were other things that were in there also, like don't show off and don't criticize the king or the queen. Um, it basically said, hey, be mindful. The British really don't drink coffee; they drink tea, and then you should probably be respectful of that and don't criticize them for that, because a tea is kind of part of their it's a cultural institution there. So just don't do criticize them for what is the norm in England. But I thought it was always it's great to look at that relationship, and obviously at the time, the United States was a junior partner in this relationship, and especially when it came to war plans and how we looked at going forward with the war, and the British were able to, has got to be a delicate way of saying it, but the British were able to force their ideas about how to conduct a war onto the Americans, again, relative newcomers to this. And that's how we end up with the North African campaign and the Mediterranean campaign, and with good reason, because when it boiled down to it, and hindsight is 2020 here, when you look at the Americans and their desire to invade France at the time, it was very, very naive in how they approached their war plans to go into France. And the British were absolutely correct in how they schooled us during the planning meetings in Casablanca about going in there. And Churchill very much got his way. He got us to sign off and continue to conduct operations, including Sicily and Italy, which he referred to as the soft underbelly. And I think Mark Clark, um, during the World at War mini documentary, stated it was really a tough old gut, but they had no way of knowing it at that point. And the British were very much coming from the position of an imperial power who wants to maintain their holdings, their imperial holdings. Um, I think one of the other things that we can't get around discussing is the the British view of segregation and how they didn't agree with it. And a lot of times the African American GIs were well accepted in places where some of their white counterparts weren't. And I think, that British progressive attitude, um, if it would have worn off on the US earlier on, some of the things that are happening since then wouldn't have happened, because there would have been just much more of an equity, a life equity. But again, hindsight is 2020 in this regard. But you can't ignore the difficulties that occurred, and lots of GIs of all colors served with distinction. Um, and obviously, as the war drags on, especially into 45, you see the Americans having to utilize the African American soldiers in the combat arms, which they had before that point had been restricted from taking part in. But then you have the Red Tails, you have the African American tankers that are serving, especially those in Patton's army as well, and then infantry units that are being formed, and then of course, many people who follow the 101st Airborne and know of the Bastogne story, the African American artillerymen that served within the perimeter, and all serving with distinction. So the British much more progressive in there, and that was with regard to segregation, and I think that rubbed a lot of GIs the wrong way at the time. But it's something you can't get around. But in this case, it all begins on 26 January 1942 when those first GIs show up. And I thought it would be a good idea to roll out a quick hit episode covering that particular topic. With that said, we're on Patreon. You can find us on patreon.com/, We're Not Lost Private Podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Amazon Music. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a whole host of other podcast catchers. I hope you consider becoming a Patreon supporter for $3 a month. You get all kinds of extras, including pictures and paperwork, our newsletter, and a bunch of private episodes that don't appear on our normal channels. With that said, thanks for checking in. I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you'll hit like and subscribe and become a follower. But thanks. I'm looking forward to our next episode, which is going to be, I'm going to be joined by Joe Hook and Edwin Popkin, and we're going to talk about Operation Pegasus, the rescue of the Red Devils. But we're gonna crack that nut open all the way. We're going to peel the onion. We're going to talk about how the vital role of the Dutch resistance. We're going to talk about it from the British airborne point of view, and then obviously we're going to talk about it from the Easy Company 506 point of view. And I think that's going to be a cracking episode. So I hope you'll all check in. But thanks again for stopping by, and I hope you got something out of this episode. Well, I'll catch you on the next one.